The wind was the first witness to her courage, sweeping across the open land like a restless spirit that had nowhere to rest. Far beyond the nearest town, where dust roads faded into wild grass and endless sky, a young woman stood alone with nothing but determination in her heart and a dream in her hands. Her name was Delphine Hartwell, and she had come to this untamed country with a simple wish to build a life that belonged only to her. In a time when most women waited for permission, she chose instead to build with her own strength, one timber at a time. The land was wide and quiet, but it was not empty. Somewhere beyond the ridge of pine trees, a pair of steady eyes watched her every movement. Delphine did not arrive with wealth or a family wagon full of supplies. She carried only tools, a small Bible, a worn blanket, and a stubborn belief that independence was worth every hardship. The cabin she planned to build would stand near a clear stream where water flowed cold and honest over smooth stones. Each morning before sunrise, she marked the ground, measured the wood, and lifted beams that were heavier than her slender arms. Her hands grew rough, her shoulders ached, yet she refused to ask for help. The townsfolk had warned her that this region was unsettled and that strangers roamed the hills, but she only smiled and continued her work. She believed the wilderness would respect her if she respected it in return. Unseen by her, high on a rocky slope, stood a man named Dakota Gray Eagle. He belonged to the Apache people and moved through the land with quiet patience. He did not approach her, did not speak to her. Instead, he observed from a distance, careful and respectful, learning her rhythm. He had seen many settlers come and go, some careless, some fearful, but Delphine was different. She worked without complaint. She left no waste behind. She treated the trees as if they were living companions rather than obstacles. Dakota felt curiosity first, then admiration. In his heart, he wondered why a young woman would choose such solitude, and slowly, without planning it, he began to hope she would stay. Days turned into weeks. The frame of the cabin rose against the horizon, simple but strong. Delphine hammered nails under the warm sun and stacked stones for the fireplace. When evening arrived, she would sit beside her unfinished doorway and watch the colors fade across the sky. Sometimes she sensed movement beyond the trees, a shadow that disappeared when she turned her head. At first, she blamed her imagination. The land was full of deer, coyotes, and drifting light, yet the feeling remained steady and calm rather than threatening. It was as if someone guarded the edge of her world without stepping inside it. Dakota found himself returning each day, told no one of his visits. He watched her build the cabin alone and admired her courage. He noticed how she paused to rest her hands, how she spoke softly to herself when lifting heavy logs, and how she carried water in simple buckets without spilling a drop. He realized she was not driven by loneliness, but by purpose. That understanding stirred something deep within him. In his tradition, the land was sacred, and the balance between people and earth mattered greatly. Delphine seemed to understand that balance without being taught. She took only what she needed and thanked the land with quiet gratitude. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across the plains. Dark clouds gathered with fierce speed. Thunder echoed through the hills, and wind bent the grass flat against the soil. Delphine hurried to secure the cabin walls, tying loose boards with rope. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, soaking her clothes and turning the ground to mud. As she struggled with a stubborn beam, her footing slipped near the stream bank. For a brief moment, she feared the rising water would carry her away. From the ridge above, Dakota saw the danger. His heart tightened. Without hesitation, he descended the slope, moving swiftly and silently through the rain. When he reached her, Delphine was trying to steady herself against the cabin frame. She froze as she noticed him for the first time. The storm roared around them, but in that instant, the world grew still. Dakota extended his hand not as a threat but as support. His presence was calm, his expression open. Delphine hesitated only a moment before accepting his help. Together, they secured the final beam and strengthened the door. When the storm passed, the cabin stood firm. The sky cleared slowly, revealing a pale sunset shining through drifting clouds. They stood outside, facing one another with cautious respect. Words felt unnecessary at first. Delphine saw no hostility in his eyes, only quiet strength. Dakota noticed her determination and the softness beneath it. Yet neither of them knew what the future would bring. The land between their worlds held history, misunderstandings, and warnings spoken by others. Still, something unspoken had formed during the storm. Connection rooted in shared respect for the wilderness and in the courage it took to stand alone. As twilight settled, Dakota began to turn away, believing his place was once again in the shadows of the hills. But Delphine stepped forward and spoke her first words to him, her voice steady, despite the beating of her heart. She thanked him for his help and asked his name. He answered simply, and the sound of it carried across the quiet land. For a brief moment, it felt as though the wind itself leaned closer to listen. Yet even as gratitude passed between them, uncertainty remained. The world beyond the ridge was changing, and strangers in the valley were beginning to notice the new cabin rising near the stream. That night, as Delphine rested inside her finished home, she wondered about the man who had watched her from afar. Outside, beneath the wide American sky, Dakota stood at the tree line, looking toward the warm glow shining through her window. He had dreamed of many things in his life, but he never expected that the lonely builder would become part of his thoughts. The land between them felt quieter now, yet tension lingered in the air like a question waiting for an answer. And as the firelight flickered inside the cabin, neither of them knew that the next sunrise would bring a choice that could change everything. The morning after the storm did not feel the same as the others. The air carried a different silence, one that seemed heavier and more aware. Delphine Hartwell woke before sunrise, as she always did, but this time she paused before stepping outside. Through the small window of her cabin, she noticed fresh footprints near the edge of the clearing. They were not wild animal tracks. They were shaped with intention, placed carefully, and leading toward the trees. Her heart beat faster, yet she did not feel fear. She felt awareness. Someone had been near her home while she slept. Outside, the land looked clean again, washed by rain and touched by soft light. The cabin stood strong, its wooden walls darkened by moisture, but steady in structure. Delphine ran her hand along the doorframe and felt a sense of pride. She had built this place with her own strength, and it had survived the storm. Still, the footprints remained in her mind. She followed them only a few steps before stopping. The tracks led toward the forest ridge, disappearing between tall pines. She understood then that her solitude was not complete, though she could not yet see the full picture. High above the clearing, Dakota Gray Eagle stood watching from the shade of the rocks. He had returned at dawn to make sure the storm had not damaged the cabin. When he saw Delphine stepping outside, he moved deeper into cover.
Oh.
He did not wish to frighten her.
Oh.
His people valued patience and balance, and he respected her independence. Yet he also knew that others in the region might not share his restraint. Settlers were expanding across the frontier, and land disputes were becoming more common. The valley was no longer as quiet as it seemed. Dakota had heard rumors from distant camps about surveyors marking territory and riders claiming land for new towns. He did not trust the growing tension between communities. He had seen how misunderstandings could turn into conflict. Delphine's cabin stood close to a stream that some claimed as shared ground. If the wrong people discovered her alone, they might question her presence or challenge her right to stay. That thought troubled him deeply. He did not want her courage to become a reason for trouble. Down in the clearing, Delphine began repairing a loose section of the fence she had built around her home. She worked carefully, adjusting each board with steady hands. While she worked, her mind returned to the man from the storm. She had noticed the calm strength in his eyes. He had not spoken with anger or pride. He had helped without demanding thanks. She wondered about his life, his family, and the path that led him to watch from the ridge. She realized she knew almost nothing about him, yet she felt a connection that was difficult to explain. Later that afternoon, Delphine gathered water from the stream. As she bent near the shore, she noticed something unusual on the far bank. A small bundle lay partially hidden beneath leaves. Curious but cautious, she approached it slowly. Inside the bundle were dried herbs and a strip of woven fabric. It was not discarded trash. It appeared intentional, as though someone had left it for her to find. She glanced toward the trees again, sensing that unseen eyes might be near. Instead of feeling threatened, she felt a quiet reassurance. The presence around her was careful, not harmful. Tokadot had placed the herbs there earlier. They were meant to help prevent illness after heavy rain. In his culture, such gestures were part of honoring neighbors and maintaining harmony. He hoped she would understand the meaning without words. Watching from a distance, he saw her study the bundle with thoughtful eyes. When she gently picked it up and held it to her chest, he felt relief. She had accepted the offering. That simple moment strengthened something inside him, though he did not yet name it. As days passed, the valley began to change. More wagons traveled along the distant road. The sound of axes cutting timber echoed from a nearby settlement. Delphine noticed smoke rising farther away each evening. The wilderness was slowly shrinking. She felt the shift but chose to continue building her life with determination. Her cabin was nearly complete now. She had added a small porch and planted a few seeds near the stream. Each action was a statement of belonging. One evening, while she was gathering firewood, she heard voices in the distance. They were not close, but the tone carried across the open ground. She could not understand the words, yet the urgency and the sound unsettled her. She stepped back toward the cabin and paused near the doorway. The forest beyond seemed darker than usual. For the first time since arriving, she considered whether staying alone was wise. Still, she refused to surrender her independence to fear. Tokita heard the same voices from his position in the hills. He recognized the direction they came from. They were not from his community. They belonged to traveling men moving through the valley. He watched as their path brought them closer to the stream area. His expression grew serious. Understood that Delphine's cabin could soon be noticed. Remained hidden, but his stance shifted. He was no longer just observing out of curiosity. He was guarding something important. That night, Delphine noticed a faint sound outside her window. It was soft, like a branch moving in the wind. She rose quietly and looked into the darkness. The fire inside her hearth cast a gentle glow across the room. Beyond the glass, she thought she saw a shadow move between the trees. Her breath slowed as she tried to remain calm. The wilderness had always felt alive, but now it felt aware. Tokita stood near the tree line once again, watching the cabin light flicker. He knew the coming days might bring change. He also knew that stepping closer could risk misunderstanding. Yet his heart told him that distance alone could not protect her forever. The land was shifting, and with it, the balance he valued so deeply. Inside the cabin, Delphine placed her hand on the wooden wall she had built with her own strength. She whispered a quiet promise to herself that she would not leave unless forced. She had come to this frontier to prove that a young woman could stand on her own. But even as she spoke those words, she felt the presence outside growing stronger, as though destiny itself was approaching from the hills. Neither of them moved toward the other that night. The cabin glowed softly against the dark frontier sky, while the ridge remained silent and watchful. The space between them felt charged with unspoken thoughts. What would happen if the newcomers reached the stream? Would Tokita reveal himself openly or remain in the shadows? And if Delphine discovered the full truth about the man who had been guarding her dreams, would she see him as protector or stranger? The answers waited in the quiet land, held beneath the wide American sky, as the next sunrise slowly prepared to rise over the valley. The conflict did not arrive with thunder this time. It came quietly, carried on horseback along the dusty trail that cut through the valley. Delphine Hartwell first noticed the riders at midday, when the sunlight was bright and the sky looked endless. From her porch, she saw movement near the stream, shapes growing larger as they approached the clearing. There were 3 men, dressed in travel-worn clothing, speaking as they pointed toward the land around her cabin. Their voices carried across the open space, sharp and uncertain. Delphine felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to stand tall. She had built this home with her own hands, and she would not hide inside it now. She stepped forward, keeping a calm expression. The riders stopped near the edge of the clearing. The tallest among them dismounted first. His name was Gideon Crow, a land surveyor working under the direction of expanding settlements to the east. He carried maps and documents, believing he was helping bring order to the frontier. He did not look hostile, but his eyes carried authority. Gideon studied the cabin carefully. He spoke politely, asking who had claimed the land and whether any official papers existed. Delphine answered honestly. She explained that she had settled there alone, with no formal ownership yet, but with intention to remain. Her voice did not shake. She described the months of labor, the storm, and the strength of the cabin. The other riders exchanged glances. One of them whispered that the stream was marked on recent expansion plans. That comment hung in the air like a warning. From the forest ridge, Tokuda Gray Eagle observed the exchange. He had seen surveyors before, and he understood the language of expansion. He knew that once a map was drawn, it could change the future of the land without a single arrow being fired. He remained hidden, but his mind moved quickly. The surveyor recorded this cabin as disputed territory. Delphine could face pressure to leave. The thought disturbed him more than he expected. Gideon suggested that Delphine should consider moving closer to the town for safety. He explained that isolated cabins often face danger from wildlife or other travelers. His tone was respectful, yet firm. Delphine listened carefully. She understood the risks of frontier life, but she also recognized that the land had been quiet before the arrival of new plans. She thanked him for his concern, but stated clearly that she intended to stay. The riders did not argue further that day. Before leaving, Gideon marked a small sign near the stream bank, indicating it as part of a surveyed route. Delphine watched in silence as they rode away. The sign felt like a symbol of change, even if no immediate action followed. She returned to her cabin with mixed emotions. Pride in her independence remained strong, yet uncertainty had entered her thoughts. That evening, Tokuda approached the clearing under cover of dusk. He did not reveal himself immediately. Instead, he examined the sign left by the surveyor. He understood what it meant. Boundaries were shifting. When he finally stepped into view near the edge of the trees, Delphine noticed him and felt both surprise and comfort. Their eyes met across the fading light. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved gently through the grass. Delphine walked toward him slowly, not out of fear, but curiosity. Tokuda explained, with simple gestures and calm words, that the land was being measured and recorded. He told her that expansion often led to misunderstandings. His voice carried concern, not judgment. She listened closely, realizing that he had not come to claim anything but to observe and protect. Delphine asked why he had watched her from the beginning. Tokuda hesitated before answering. He explained that he respected her determination, had not wished to interfere with her independence. He believed she deserved the chance to build her home without pressure. His words were honest, and his eyes reflected sincerity. In that quiet exchange, the distance between their worlds felt smaller. However, the presence of surveyors meant more riders could return. Tokuda shared that some men in nearby camps were uneasy about land changes. He did not name anyone directly, but his tone suggested tension among different groups in the region. Delphine understood that her cabin might become part of a larger dispute she never intended to join. That realization weighed heavily on her heart. Meanwhile, Gideon returned to town with his report. He described the cabin and the woman who lived there. Some listeners saw her as brave. Others questioned her right to settle without permission. Conversations began spreading through the community about the stream and the surrounding valley. What had once been empty land now felt like contested ground. Rumors traveled quickly along the frontier roads. Back at the cabin, Delphine began noticing small changes. Tracks appeared near the fence, not threatening, but present. She could not tell if they belonged to travelers, animals, or someone watching from a distance. She felt the importance of remaining alert, yet she refused to let fear control her actions. Each morning she continued her routine, gathering water, tending her seeds, and strengthening the cabin walls. Tokuda remained nearby, though still cautious. He spoke with members of his community about the survey markers. Some elders advised patience, believing that careful dialogue was better than confrontation. Others worried that continued expansion would push families away from ancestral grounds. Tokuda listened to both perspectives. He felt responsible not only for his people but also for maintaining peace in the valley. Delphine's presence had become part of that responsibility, even if she did not fully realize it. One night, as Delphine prepared dinner, she heard distant voices again. They seemed closer than before. She stepped outside and saw a faint lantern light near the trail. Her heart raced. She could not see clearly, but she sensed that more riders were approaching. The cabin suddenly felt small against the vast land. She considered whether to signal for help, yet she hesitated, unsure how others might react. From the ridge, Tokuda also saw the lights. He knew that this moment was important. If the newcomers reached the cabin with demands, the situation could grow complicated. He moved silently down the slope, not rushing, but not delaying either. His presence remained hidden among the shadows, yet his determination was clear. Delphine stood near the porch, listening carefully. The night air felt heavy. She wondered if her independence had drawn attention she never wanted. She remembered the storm, the herbs left by the stream, and the steady gaze from the hills. She realized that her story was no longer only about building a cabin. It had become part of a larger frontier struggle between settlement, tradition, and land rights. As the lantern lights drew closer, Dakota paused near the trees. He watched the clearing, ready to step forward if needed, but uncertain about how the meeting would unfold. Delphine sensed his presence, though she could not see him clearly. The cabin door remained open behind her, glowing with warm light. The approaching riders were about to enter the edge of her world. The valley held its breath, and the line between safety and uncertainty narrowed under the quiet sky. The lantern lights grew brighter as the riders approached the clearing, and Delphine Hartwell felt the weight of the night pressing against her cabin walls. She stood firm on the porch, her hands steady at her sides, even though her heart was beating fast. The sound of horses stepping on gravel echoed across the stream. This was no longer a distant rumor or a quiet survey. This felt real. The frontier had come to her door. The first rider to enter the clearing was Gideon Crow. He raised his hand in a sign of peace, but his expression showed concern. Behind him rode two officials from the settlement office, carrying papers and maps. Gideon spoke clearly, explaining that the stream and surrounding land were under review for formal development. He did not accuse Delphine of wrongdoing. Instead, he said the land required documentation. His voice carried authority, yet there was no cruelty in it. Still, the meaning was clear. Questions were coming. Delphine listened carefully. She had expected challenges someday, but not so soon. She replied with calm strength, explaining that she had built the cabin with her own labor and had lived there through storms and hardship. She described how she respected the land, how she used only what she needed, and how her presence had not harmed the valley. Her words were simple but firm. She did not beg. She did not argue. She only told the truth. From the shadowed trees, Dakota Gray Eagle watched every movement. He saw how the officials examined the cabin and marked notes on their papers. He understood that once records were written, decisions could follow. His people had experienced changes before. He felt the tension growing, not as anger, but as a quiet storm waiting to break. He stepped slightly closer, remaining hidden, but ready to act if needed. Gideon asked Delphine whether anyone else had assisted her in building the cabin. The question was not hostile, but it carried implication. Delphine paused before answering. She could have remained silent, but honesty mattered to her. She explained that a man had helped during the storm to secure the structure, but only in a moment of emergency. She did not know his full story. She had not invited him. The words felt delicate, yet they were true. At that moment, Dakota stepped forward from the trees. He did not rush. He did not appear aggressive. His posture was upright and respectful. The lantern light reflected softly on his features as he approached the edge of the clearing. The officials noticed him immediately. A brief silence followed. Delphine turned, surprised but not afraid. Dakota spoke calmly, introducing himself and explaining that he had observed the land to ensure safety. He clarified that he had no claim to the cabin or the stream. His intention was protection, not ownership. His voice carried dignity. He did not speak loudly, but everyone listened closely. The air felt thick with anticipation. Gideon studied Dakota carefully. The surveyor understood that the presence of local communities required careful handling. He asked whether Toka represented any group or authority. Toka replied that he spoke for himself, though he respected his people and their traditions. His tone remained steady. He did not argue. He only sought understanding. Delphine felt something shift inside her as she watched Dakota stand openly for the first time. For weeks, he had remained in the shadows, guarding silently. Now he stood in the light, choosing transparency. The gesture meant more to her than words could explain. She realized that her independence and his quiet protection were not opposites. They could exist together. The officials discussed among themselves, reviewing their maps and notes. One mentioned that the area near the stream might be considered shared territory until fully evaluated. This statement created tension. Shared land meant temporary decisions. Temporary decisions could change at any time. Delphine felt the uncertainty rising again. She had worked so hard to build stability. Now everything seemed to depend on paperwork and distant offices. Takata stepped closer to Delphine, not touching her, but standing near enough to show unity. His presence gave her strength. Gideon noticed this alignment. He understood. The situation involved more than property lines. It involved people, trust, and future relationships. The surveyor did not wish for conflict. He only wanted order. Yet order could not ignore human hearts. A sudden sound interrupted the discussion. From the trail behind the officials, another group of riders approached quickly. Their movement was faster, more urgent. They were not part of the survey team. Their clothing suggested they were independent travelers seeking opportunity in the expanding frontier. Their expressions were sharp and impatient. The atmosphere shifted immediately. One of the new riders called out, claiming interest in claiming land near the stream for commercial use. His tone was bold, suggesting he believed the cabin stood on valuable ground. The arrival of these additional men heightened tension, while Delphine felt the situation becoming more complex. What had started as a survey conversation was turning into competing interests. Takota's eyes remained steady. He understood that this moment could determine the future of the valley. He did not move aggressively, but he positioned himself slightly between the newcomers and Delphine. His stance was protective yet respectful. Delphine noticed his quiet courage and felt gratitude rising within her. Gideon raised his voice slightly, reminding everyone that the land was under official review. He insisted that no immediate claims could override the process. His words created a temporary pause, but the newcomers seemed dissatisfied. The air grew tense. Horses shifted nervously. Lanterns flickered in the night breeze. Delphine took a deep breath. She realized that her cabin represented more than shelter. It symbolized independence, frontier settlement, land rights, and personal courage. She felt the eyes of everyone on her. She knew that whatever she said next could influence the direction of events. The responsibility felt heavy. Takota glanced toward her briefly, offering silent encouragement. He trusted her strength. He believed she would speak with honesty and dignity. Delphine stepped forward again, addressing both groups. She stated clearly that she wished to live peacefully, to respect the land, and to coexist without conflict. Her voice did not tremble. She asked that decisions consider both human effort and community balance. The night grew quieter as her words settled. Even the restless horses seemed calmer. Gideon lowered his papers slightly, thinking deeply about what had been said. The newcomers exchanged uncertain looks. The tension remained, but something had changed. The situation was reaching its peak, standing at the edge of decision. Takota looked at Delphine with admiration. He understood that the next moments would define the outcome of everything they had experienced. The survey, the strangers, the land claims, their connection all converged in this single clearing under the wide frontier sky. The lantern light glowed softly between them, and the riders waited for the next statement that could shift the balance. Delphine held her ground. Takota remained steady, and Gideon prepared to speak again. The valley felt suspended in time, as if the wind itself was waiting for the final word that would decide there. The silence in the clearing felt longer than any storm. Delphine Hartwell stood steady beside her cabin, her heart still racing but her voice calm. Takota Gray Eagle remained at her side, and Gideon Crow waited with the survey papers in his hands. The newcomers watched closely, unsure whether this moment would turn into disagreement or understanding. The frontier night seemed to hold its breath. Gideon finally spoke. He admitted that the land survey was meant to organize growth, not to remove honest settlers. He explained that after reviewing the situation, he would mark the cabin as an established residence pending formal approval. His decision meant that Delphine would not be forced to leave. The stream area would remain under observation, but no one could claim it without proper community review. His tone was firm yet fair. The tension in the air slowly began to soften. The newcomers tried to argue that the valley should be opened for commercial use. However, Gideon reminded them that expansion must follow rules and respect existing homes. He stated clearly that the presence of a built cabin, especially one standing strong through storms, showed commitment to the land. His words carried weight. The men understood that pushing forward without agreement would not succeed. After a brief discussion, they agreed to withdraw and present their plans through official channels. As the riders turned away, the clearing grew quieter. The lantern light flickered gently again, and the stream flowed as it always had. Delphine felt relief wash over her, but she remained composed. She knew that this outcome was not just luck. It was the result of courage, patience, and respectful dialogue. The land had not been taken. The cabin remained. The frontier had not erased her dream. When the officials prepared to leave, Gideon approached Delphine once more. He acknowledged her determination and the skill it took to build a cabin alone in such a remote region. He admitted that her story would be recorded as an example of resilience in the expanding settlement. Delphine thanked him for listening rather than assuming. Their conversation ended with mutual respect. It was not a victory of one side over another, but a balance achieved through understanding. After the riders departed, only Delphine and Tokuda remained in the clearing. The night felt different now. The danger had passed, and the valley seemed peaceful again. Delphine turned toward Tokuda, her eyes reflecting the lantern glow. She thanked him sincerely for standing beside her during the difficult moment. She told him that his presence had given her strength. Tokuda replied that she had shown bravery long before anyone arrived. He explained that she had built not only a cabin, but also trust between their worlds. They walked slowly toward the porch together. The air felt cooler, yet comfortable. Delphine realized that she no longer saw Tokuda as a distant watcher. He was someone who respected her independence while offering protection when needed. Tokuda admitted that watching her had changed him as well. He had come to understand that cooperation could create stronger bonds than isolation. The frontier was not only about land. It was about people learning to live with awareness and dignity. In the weeks that followed, the valley began to settle into a new rhythm. The survey records officially recognized Delphine's cabin as an established home. The stream remained open for shared use, ensuring fairness for nearby communities. The newcomers adjusted their plans to avoid conflict and followed the proper review process. What could have become a dispute turned into a structured path forward. The land development continued, but now with clearer boundaries and respect for those already living there. Tokuda visited the clearing openly after that night. He no longer needed to stay hidden in the shadows. Delphine welcomed his visits with warmth, shared conversations about the land, frontier life, and their different traditions. Through these talks, they learned more about each other's values. Delphine discovered the importance of balance and heritage. Tokuda appreciated her determination and honesty. Their connection grew slowly and naturally, built on trust rather than urgency. The cabin became more than shelter. It became a meeting place for understanding. Delphine planted a small garden near the stream, and Tokuda helped her choose areas that would thrive. They worked together while respecting each other's independence. The surrounding community began to see their cooperation as a positive example. Instead of division, the valley experienced unity. The frontier settlement expanded, but it did so with consideration. One evening, as the sun lowered over the hills, Delphine stood on her porch and looked across the land she had once feared losing. The sky glowed in shades of gold and pink. Tokuda stood beside her, both of them quiet. The stream reflected the sunset, steady and unchanged. Delphine realized that building a cabin alone had tested her strength. But it was the willingness to stand with others when needed that truly secured her future. She understood that independence did not mean isolation. It meant having the courage to choose when to accept help and when to stand firm. Tokuda had shown her that protection and respect could exist without control. Together they had faced surveyors, newcomers, and uncertainty. Together they had prevented misunderstanding from turning into conflict. The valley remained peaceful because communication replaced fear. The story of the young woman who built her cabin alone spread through nearby towns. People spoke about her resilience and about the calm Apache man who chose dialogue over distance. Their example became part of frontier history, reminding others that land disputes could be handled with wisdom rather than tension. The key words of the valley shifted from conflict and expansion to cooperation, settlement, and shared growth. As seasons changed, the cabin grew into a comfortable home. The garden flourished. The stream continued to flow. Delphine felt safe, not because the wilderness had changed, but because she had grown stronger within it. Tokuda remained a respected presence, contributing to harmony between communities. Their relationship developed slowly, rooted in trust, shared values, and mutual respect. It was not rushed. It was steady and genuine. In the end, the frontier did not divide them. It brought them into understanding. The cabin stood as a symbol of perseverance. The land remained beautiful and open. And the once lonely builder was no longer alone in spirit. The valley carried forward with balance, proving that courage, communication, and respect could shape a happy ending, even in the wildest places.